5 questions, and you're good with that. And so I sent 5 questions, and I thought maybe we would chat about it. And, you know, he invited me for coffee, and then he said, you know, I'm not really going to answer your questions. So anyways, I am going to ask questions. I hope they represent what most people's interest will be here. If not, he will be signing books afterwards. So those of you who didn't pick up a book bag, he's agreed to sign your books. So for those of you who've read it, you know that the Book of Negroes is told through the eyes of an 11-year-old girl. And there is no doubt that this is the kind of question that just about everybody has asked you, Lawrence. How on earth did you transform yourself into speaking through the voice of an 11-year-old?
Thanks. And for the record, I don't believe I told Betsy I'd never answer her questions. I'm delighted to answer your questions. And thank you. You mentioned earlier that people are influenced by others, and of course I'm here because of your influence. So thank you for inviting me to support your terrific work in Haiti. How did I put myself into the mind frame of a girl and a woman? Because of course the character grows from her infancy to, well, just before she dies. I kind of channeled my eldest daughter, who was about 11 when I started writing it actually, and I gave the protagonist my eldest daughter's name, and I just kept asking myself, if my daughter had to go through this hellish nightmare, how would she survive? And how would she survive emotionally? And so imagining I was writing about my own child, and putting myself in her shoes helped me kind of move into the voice of a young girl and a woman. And really, I'd say anybody with a grade 9 education can research, but the soul, the heart, the real challenge of writing fiction is to imagine the feel and the sound and the thinking and the heartbeat of the people you're writing about. And so I just had to really imagine what it might be like to see your parents killed and to be thrown across the Atlantic Ocean and brought into a whole new planetary system of the transatlantic slave trade, and then liberated in New York and over to Canada. It was really more than research and more than intellectual pursuit. It was an act of imagination.
Now, the journey that Amanita took is on a slave ship, and this book really struck me because, of course, this is the same journey that the generations of slaves, of current men and women of Haiti and children of Haiti, who their forefathers took on and suffered, you know, in immeasurable scars, and currently do. And even in our work, we refer to this history that the effects or the symptoms of that are what we call the twin demons of fear and mistrust, which is affected by the high rate of illiteracy. So many people speak about literacy, making them free, and so can you speak to the importance of literacy in the life of Amanita that contributed to her eventual freedom?
The importance of literacy in the life of Aminata, my protagonist. Well, as you well know, there are so many ways to dehumanize or to try to strip the liberties from or prevent a person from gaining full liberty. And in the instance of the aftershocks of the transatlantic slave trade and of slavery in Canada, of course, and in the States and in the Caribbean and Central America, one of the ways to dehumanize a population was to prevent them from reading and writing, make it illegal to teach an enslaved person how to read and write, and to make it illegal for an enslaved person to learn to read and write. And of course, any person who has an iota of hope and ambition and an active brain and a desire to live fully wants to be an active, full member of society. And any person brought into this world, even in the time of the transatlantic slave trade, would know that you can't function and circulate and understand and sort of decipher this world that that you're hauled into in chains against your will, unless you can read your way through it, unless you can understand this secret code, this language, this is literacy. And of course, it's not as if all people who were enslaved and hauled across the ocean were illiterate. Aminata comes from a family in which her father was literate. He was a Muslim in what the country now known as Mali, and of course, Muslims in Mali in the 18th century were reading the Quran, and they were able to read in Arabic, and so she's been exposed to the seeds of literacy before she's abducted and sent in chains into slavery. But to learn to read is to learn to be equal, is to have the doors of opportunity flung open to you, is to claim your full citizenship, is to walk and stand proud, is to understand the world that you're in. And the people who most desire literacy are the ones who've been most denied it. And nothing characterizes, I think, speaking about my own African American ancestry, nothing characterizes more the desires of, say, black people in the Americas than the fundamental historical desire to overturn that rule and to learn to read and write and to acquire the skills of literacy and numeracy in order to function freely and fully in the world. And so literacy and citizenship are really fingers of the same hand.
I love that answer.
Told you I did.
Yeah. Well, most of you may know we are sitting on the road of history here today, the Underground Railroad that brought approximately 40,000 slaves into Canada. It was in 1793 that Lieutenant Governor John Graves introduced an act that prevented their importation and freed the future children of slaves. I believe you're an active member of the Black Loyalist Heritage Society, are you? And the Ontario Black History Society as well. So most of us in this room are sitting in the midst of the richness of this history. So what do you think we should do with what we know?
Thanks, Betsy. Well, let's just talk a bit about that history and what we know of it. My parents married interracially in D.C. in '53 and moved the next day to Toronto and spent their lives at the forefront of the human rights movement here in Ontario, and founded the Ontario Black History Society, which I was an active volunteer with as a teenager and young adult. And there are many, like so many peoples of so many backgrounds, there are many threads of migration, of movement of black peoples into Canada. We've been here since about 1603 in what was then called the Nouvelle France, but what would now be known as, in this case, Nova Scotia. Matthew de Costa, a black man of Portuguese origin, appears to be the first known black person to be walking free in these lands, and the lands that were then New France or Nouvelle France, now Nova Scotia. He served as an interpreter between Samuel de Champlain and Mi'kmaq peoples, so he learned both languages. And black people have come into this country since then, and for 400 plus years, just as long as we've been in the States. And the Underground Railroad was one of many means by which black people came into this country. John Graves Simcoe, the first Lieutenant Governor of Canada, attempted to abolish slavery right here, and there are so many legislators who were slave owners at the time that he failed to introduce an abolition of slavery in 1793, and the most he could get was a partial abolition, which prohibited further importation of enslaved peoples and required those who were enslaved to be liberated at the age of 20, by the age of 25, that kind of thing. He got a partial ban, and that's all he could accomplish. Slavery in Canada wasn't actually abolished until August 1st, 1834, through a proclamation of the British Parliament, and abolished throughout most of the British Empire. So it took a while beyond John Graves Simcoe to do that. But as for the Underground Railroad, it's one means by which people came. The one that I write about in the Book of Negroes happens much earlier, when 3,000 black people migrate from New York City to Nova Scotia after serving the British on the losing side of the American Revolution. As a reward for their service to the British who lost the American Revolutionary War, the British bring them by ship in a 9-day trip to Nova Scotia from New York City, where they become the Black United Empire Loyalists and face their own demons in Nova Scotia. But the Underground Railroad is one of these many mechanisms by which people came. It's a little bit self-congratulatory to think only about it as a wonderful thing, because we welcomed Black people from the United States and liberated them if they came up through the Underground Railroad into what is now Ontario or Quebec. But enslaved Ontarians who were Black remained in slavery at the same time that African Americans were liberated when they came here. So we have people living in twin communities, some enslaved and some free at the same time. And of course, once the Civil War ended in the United States, many of the Black people who come up to Canada through the Underground Railroad turned right around and went back because they found they had more opportunities and, frankly, in many respects, less racism in the States in Black communities than they found here in, say, southwestern Ontario. So the Underground Railroad has a flip side of flight after arriving here, but it's one of the many ways by which people came and settled in places like St. Catharines, Hamilton, Oakville, Owen Sound, Hamilton, Amherstburg, Windsor, so forth.
So speaking of Harriet Tubman, she was known as the Moses of her people, and she did establish her base of operations in St. Catharines. There's lots of plaques all around, this area, that different aspects of that. And there's one that I caught about Harriet Tubman. It's at the Parliament Oak Public School in Niagara-on-the-Lake. And it says this: "When I found I had crossed, there was such a glory over everything, I felt I was in heaven. I am free, and they shall be free. I shall bring them here." Now, a lot of these journeys are often undertaken by the light of lanterns, and I hope you appreciate the lanterns that are on your table today. It is our hope that enough will be donated that we can give these lanterns as gifts to the 400 graduates that will be graduating in October in Haiti. Because, I hope I don't beat this literacy thing to death today, but it is why we are here. So this question might be a little bit redundant, but, Haitians often do describe their newfound literacy as light, having emerged from the blindness of not being able to read and write. And I'm wondering if you would care to expand a little more on the significance between light and literacy.
Well, light offers opportunity, and light offers the chance to find your way, and light offers the opportunity to move forward and to create. It's hard to create in utter darkness when you can see nothing. Well, literacy does the same. And I have not been to Haiti. I'd love to go and see what you're doing there, actually. But I have spent 45 years as a volunteer with an organization that does work with girls and women in sub-Saharan Africa, and I've been volunteering and working in various countries in sub-Saharan Africa and raising funds for this other NGO for 45 or so years. And when I worked as a volunteer in the country of Mali in '89, I met this 80-year-old man named Yusuf, in whose village I was staying, and he had just learned to read in a national literacy program at the age of 80. And if any of you have been to France, you'll know this popular kind of fashion magazine called Paris Match, or Paris Match. It's a big deal in France. And every day Yusuf would be flipping through pages of Paris Match in this little village in Mali. And I said, "Yusuf, why are you reading that magazine?" "Well, that's the only thing I've got around here. Somebody here was in development and they left a bunch of copies of Paris Match, so he'd just read whatever he could. And he just had such an appetite, and he was so delighted with himself. He was spending an hour or two a day reading. He'd learned to read at 80. It was like a light switch went on. He was so pleased, and I was so honored for him. And it's, as you mentioned in your earlier remarks, it's ridiculous to assume that literacy and the acquisition of literacy is only for 6-year-olds or 10-year-olds or 12-year-olds. Literacy is something that's required and desired and coveted by peoples of all age, including 80-year-old Yusuf in Mali. And so literacy really is light. Literacy is opportunity. Literacy is a chance to be a full citizen and to exercise your brain and to move forward in the ways that you choose to in the world. And to deny one literacy is to deny one really the vote in the largest sense of the word. It's to deny one the right to participate fully in society.
Before I ask my last question, how many people have read the Book of Negroes in this room? Should it be embarrassing? Oh, embarrassing, yeah. There you go. That shouldn't embarrass you, because everyone gets a copy of that book today, so if you haven't picked it up, please do so. When I first read your book, I have to say that the first page of chapter 2 really, literally gobsmacked me with this line: to stare into another's face is to do two things: to recognize their humanity and to assert your own. I was so taken by it that that's when I first contacted Lawrence to ask if we could use that line as part of our Facebook page. And he did grant permission, and I really thank you for that. I also vowed at that time that after reading your book, if I were not working in Haiti, I would be compelled to do so, if only to redeem the sins of my Dutch ancestors. So in preparing myself for this Q&A, I did see that this has become the most quotable quote, one of the most quotable quotes of your book. And why do you think that is?
Well, to be a little playful, have you ever noticed that if a driver is cutting you off or doing something really rude to you on the road, that they never look at you? You'll never meet the eyes, or almost never, of the eyes of somebody who's being a really hostile, aggressive, mean-spirited driver. Well, they don't want to look at you because they don't want to acknowledge your humanity and maybe be forced to let you in and to show a little gentleness or patience. And on the other side of the equation, I mean, if you know a person's name or if you look in their eyes, it's kind of an act of empathy, it's an act of recognition. It's kind of hard to be cruel or mean-spirited, you know, if you actually look into the eyes of a person and recognize their humanity. So I think to see a person and to have contact through the eyes and through conversation is a way of getting closer to them and recognizing that they have the same fundamental needs and aspirations that you do.
Well, all eyes are on you tonight, so thank you very, very much. He's Larry to me now because I'm a friend. He has agreed to stay afterwards and sign books, so pick up your book. He's happy to sign them for you. And please let's give a wonderful round of warm Niagara applause for him.